And then the last S is symptoms. Symptom treatment. Okay? There are so many mental and physical disorders that can cause us to be cut off from our highest human selves and shift into lizard brain and puppy brain, right? Needing connections. Think about this. There's interesting studies, okay, that between 50 to 80% of people in prison have a history of severe traumatic brain injuries. Whereas in the general population, it's about 12%. So your average brain of your average prisoner probably resembles those of a retired NFL player. There's a good TED Talk about this. Lead poisoning. In the 50s, when the use of automobiles really exploded in this country, we had a lot of lead-based gas. And it looks like the crime spike in the 70s was related to exposure to lead. That's a really interesting theory that has a whole lot of science behind it. So lead poisoning, actually, we know can lead to symptoms of mental illness and criminal behavior. Glucose processing, okay? All these things about diabetes and insulin resistance, impaired glucose tolerance, all that stuff can really affect your mood, send you right into fight, flight, freeze, full feed, and fact, right? People lose impulse control, and they can lose impulse control, and it can lead to a lot of really difficult emotional states. Chronic pain. My cousin works at a place where they do evaluations for disability, and she says to me one day, and I thought this was pure genius, she's like, people in pain can be really crabby. Yes, they can. Physical pain will drain our resources, our inner emotional resources. It really can, and make us really difficult to be our highest self. Substance abuse, of course, is a disease that has a pervasive impact on our ability to pass. All right, we got to treat those symptoms of substance abuse. Learning disabilities can lead to a lot of frustration, okay? High cognitive load. If you have low, what they call processing speed, everything is confusion in your life. You're going to be panicking a lot, then you get fight, flight, freeze, full feed, and fact. Even hearing and vision problems. Think about a kid in the class who can't see the board, can't hear the teacher, right? They're going to check out. They might act up in class. They might refuse to do anything in class. That's a freeze response. They might be, eating under the table all the time. There's all kinds of things. They might start flirting with the person in the desk next door, so you get all kinds of stuff. So that's what PASS looks like in our day-to-day life, right? It looks like our physical needs are met. There's absence of aggression and abandonment. That means our relationships are in pretty good shape. We have a reasonable amount of structure in our lives. Structure, surprisingly enough, makes us more flexible, and our symptoms are treated. Go through the checklist, right? So before you attribute, we often do this, before we attribute like motivations to people, we got to make sure that they pass the safety test, right? Crabby kid, we could decide as a brat, or we could say, did they get enough sleep? Have they been fed? Do they feel like somebody is being aggressive toward them? I mean, I've seen a lot of situations where the preschool teacher sees a kid be a little bit cranky and will just pick him up. And then the kid starts flailing and kicking, right? They feel, if my boss saw me struggling with something and picked me up, like I would see it as an act of aggression. Surprisingly enough, kids do too. Kids also have a sense of their own personal boundaries. Absence of aggression, structure, and then make sure those symptoms are treated, go to the doctor. If you can't solve your immediate problem by meeting physical needs and connecting and making sure that people's routines aren't messed with, then, we need to get an evaluation for all kinds of potential things. So that's passing, okay? So when we're unsafe and disconnected, the first thing we got to do is pass with care. We got to pass with care. Let's talk a little bit about what aggression is. Okay, I've got a little bit of an acronym there too. What is aggression and abandonment? This is our definition of aggression. Shouting. Now that doesn't always have to mean that you have elevated your voice. Lots of us who have kids, your kids are like, stop yelling at me. And you're like, I'm not yelling. Okay, it has to be this perception of shouting, of harsh words, okay? Shouting, hurting, that can be physical or it can be insults. Isolating, right, generally leads to a spike in aggression. And that's often our go-to. Go into timeout, go to the hall, go to the principal's office. You are ejected from the tribe for your behavior, okay? And then threats, right? If you don't do X, I'm going to do Y. Now, setting clear boundaries is really different from making threats. Okay? Having rules with obvious logical consequences attached is a really different thing from just, if you don't stop hitting your brother, I'm going to whoop you, which is an actual thing that I heard in an actual store, big box store one day from a mama. So shouting, hurting, isolating, and threats. So abuse and abandonment are a bunch of SHIT. I love acronyms. Okay, so it's a bunch of shit. So the thing is that if we don't pass, the consequences are potentially quite devastating. But there's another form, another thing. If we don't pass as kids, all right, we can be set up for a lifetime of not passing, all right? So what it kind of boils down to is this. People whose behavior interferes with somebody else's goals, they generally don't pass. What do I mean by that? Well, the teacher wants well-behaved children who score high on standardized tests. And this kid's trauma reaction is getting in the way of the teacher's goals, right? And therefore, the people who don't pass literally don't pass. You're not going to pass the class. You're not going to pass up to the next grade, the next skill level, get promoted, sometimes not even get hired. Parents want well-behaved children. Teachers want attentive students. Communities want low crime and law-abiding citizens. Leaders want cooperative employees, right? Leaders, employers, this is what they want. But when an unsafe person thwarts these aims, they tend to get labeled a behavior problem. And then they're, available for behavioral health interventions. See, what we talk about is behavioral health, which usually means we're bugging other people. We're causing problems for other people in our lives. We don't talk about meeting primary needs, right? The only way to change challenging behavior is to meet the needs that drive the behavior, okay? When people are in fight, flight, freeze, full, feed, and fuck, they need safety and connection. What we often give them instead is judgment and blame, right? And so we're like, okay, they're a problem, instead of their unmet needs are a problem. Like, instead of, oh no, somebody has unmet needs, let's get those needs met. We tend to just focus on changing behavior. The reality is that you can't change behavior in any meaningful way until we meet those needs. There's no meaningful behavior change until we have our needs met. It just doesn't really happen. Okay, we can change behavior through coercion and we can sticker chart people and give them rewards and prizes, but as soon as you remove those incentive structures, it goes back. If you want really deep internal change, people need safety and connection. They need to pass. People who are unsafe and disconnected often don't pass normal developmental milestones. Even in the softest, mildest forms, like sticker charts, to their harshest forms, like mass incarceration, these behavior schemes are fundamentally coercive, and they're fundamentally driven by other people's goals and wants of the person, and not the person themselves. So bad kids, bad apples are really just people who don't pass. They don't pass the safety test. And then they become unsafe. That's the funny thing about our safety-seeking instincts, is they so often result in just the opposite. And safety-seeking can so quickly become chaos-making. But chaos-making behavior is, again, the consequence of not passing. It causes a vicious cycle of not passing, of not growing emotionally or mentally. Unsafe people act in unsafe ways. Hurt people hurt people.